All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Welcome. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating psychological distinction that, honestly, fundamentally changes how we view our own behavior. We're going to completely deconstruct the science of remorse by looking at some comprehensive research that compares two concepts you probably thought were exactly the same thing. I know I did. We're talking about guilt proneness versus guilt experience.
To kick things off, let me ask you a simple question. Is guilt really just a single unpleasant emotion? I mean, most of us just think of guilt as that terrible, sinking feeling in the pit of our stomach right after we've done something wrong. We've all been there, right? But psychological research actually tells a vastly different story. It splits this concept into two totally distinct ideas, and understanding this split is absolutely crucial for understanding how our moral character actually functions day to day.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly hit the two faces of guilt, look at guilt proneness as the compass, guilt experience as the alarm, break down a really cool fever versus immune system analogy, and finally, look at why this distinction actually matters for us.
Okay, Section 1. The two faces of guilt, state versus trait.
First up, let's look at the one we are all the most familiar with, guilt experience, which is known in the psychology world as state guilt. This is basically a temporary, context-dependent feeling of remorse that pops up after a specific wrongdoing or ethical failure. It is completely episodic. It's that reactive, after-the-fact emotion that hits you like a ton of bricks once the bad deed is already done and dusted.
To really anchor this idea, just think of a relatable internal monologue. Something like, man, I feel guilty because I just lied. That is state guilt in action, right there. The bad thing happened, and now you are reacting to it. It's tied directly to a specific event that has already occurred in the past. You struck the key, and now you are hearing the sound.
But here is where the science gets super fascinating. Contrast that reactive feeling with guilt proneness, or trait guilt. This is defined as a stable, long-term disposition to feel guilty across a whole bunch of situations, even before a misdeed ever occurs. Do you see the major difference there? This isn't a temporary feeling, it's a built-in sensitivity. People who are high in guilt proneness actually experience anticipatory distress just at the mere thought of letting someone down.
Listen to how different this internal monologue sounds compared to the last one. I generally feel guilty whenever I worry I may have hurt someone. Notice that? This person isn't talking about something they actually did. It's a persistent anticipatory concern. It is an ongoing trait, a constant background awareness, rather than a sudden, shocking reaction to making a mistake. There's a brilliant analogy that illustrates the difference between these two. Just imagine your mind is a piano. Guilt experience, state guilt, is like striking a single piano key. You play the specific note of a misdeed, and boom, you hear the sound. But guilt proneness? That's like tuning the entire instrument. The more finely tuned the piano is, the more it resonates even to the absolute lightest touch. A person with high guilt proneness is so finely tuned to ethical cues that they produce a faint little warning note of guilt whenever a potential moral trigger appears, long before they actually strike a bad chord.
Moving on to Section 2. Guilt proneness acting as our compass.
So, guilt proneness basically operates as an incredible anticipatory warning system. It detects moral conflicts before they even happen. Think of it as your proactive moral compass. It's this self-regulatory trait that drives us to literally mentally rehearse the outcomes of our actions in our heads. By anticipating the emotional consequences, this internal alarm system makes a person way more likely to avoid wrongdoing preemptively. It uses empathy and perspective-taking to keep your actions completely aligned with your core values.
A highly guilt-prone individual will naturally pause before acting and ask themselves, wait, what will I actually feel if I go through with this? Think about that level of self-awareness for a second. This foresight is exactly what discourages unethical behavior before it even sees the light of day. It's not about punishing yourself after the fact. It's about anticipating the pain of remorse to actively guide the choices you are making right now in the present.
All right, Section 3. Guilt experience, the alarm.
Now, state guilt is a reactive alert signaling a moral breach, which motivates corrective behaviors. Unlike the proactive compass of proneness we just talked about, experience is entirely reactive. It only ever occurs after a transgression has been committed. The alarm blares, signaling that a line has been crossed, and that deeply unpleasant feeling is what prompts us to step up and try to make things right.
When you sit there and think, I feel just awful about breaking that promise, you are experiencing state guilt. And yeah, while it feels absolutely terrible to sit in that emotion, it actually serves a crucial function.
That reactive thought triggers apologies, it drives restitution, and it motivates changed conduct moving forward. It's basically the harsh alert system that pushes you to repair the damage you've just caused.
Which brings us to Section 4, the fever versus the immune system. This analogy absolutely nails it. It's such a powerful contrast. On one side, we have the fever. This represents guilt experience. A fever is a reactive sign that you already have a moral infection. The damage is done, the boundary is crossed, and your body is just sounding the alarm. But on the other side, we have the immune system. This is guilt's proneness. It is the vigilant, proactive prevention of infections before the symptoms ever even appear. If you are only treating the fever, just dealing with state guilt after you mess up, without building up your moral immunity, well, you are leaving yourself completely vulnerable to making the exact same mistakes over and over again.
Finally, Section 5. Why does any of this actually matter?
Understanding this split yields highly actionable takeaways across 4 major areas of our lives. First, for yourself. If you constantly feel guilty over minor things, recognizing that you have high guilt proneness can actually help you use mindfulness to regulate that excessive guilt, stopping you from getting stuck in a paralyzing loop of rumination. Second, in parenting and education. Instead of solely punishing mistakes after they happen, which, remember, only addresses state guilt, we should actively ask kids, how would you feel if you broke this rule? That builds forward-looking foresight. Third, for organizations. Workplaces need to cultivate upfront ethical foresight to prevent misconduct, rather than just waiting around to punish violations after they occur. And finally, in clinical practice, therapists must carefully tailor their treatment. Counseling someone for acute guilt over one single mistake is completely different from treating a chronic, deeply ingrained guilt-prone pattern.
So the crucial point we're taking away today is this. Distinguishing state guilt from trait guilt proneness is not just some academic pedantry. It is literally the key to understanding human moral character. A complete perspective on guilt requires both the internal disposition to avoid wrongdoing and the emotional response to it. You need the compass to guide you, and you definitely need the alarm to wake you up when you inevitably drift off course. Which leaves me with one final kind of provocative question for you to ponder. When you look at your own life, your workplace, or how you parent your kids, are you just treating the fever, or are you actively building your moral immunity? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it helps you fine-tune your own moral instrument. Catch you next time.